Welcome everybody. This is going to be an overview of the Battle of Midway, a new game from historicalboardgaming.com. And I am Mike Kelley, the lead designer of the game, and I'm going to take you through a lot of the setup information and what the game looks like overall. So I've got my board set up already, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go over some of the details as to why Midway sets up differently than you might expect with other Global War or Axis and Allies style games. So in the rule book, we're going to have units identification, so you can get familiar with the units in this particular game. And each country is going to have its own setup chart, which sort of works like the old Axis and Allies style setup charts, if you will. So on the chart, you're going to be able to see that there's the area that they set up in across the top and the unit type listed down on the column. And so you just cross-reference that like the old style chart just to see where items set up. The biggest difference in this game versus other games of similar type is, for example, over here on Midway Island, you see a fighter unit here with 2 chips underneath it. That actually represents 2 fighters and not 3. So the model is just a model identification as to what the chips represent, and the chip is the quantity. You'll see that on the setup chart for the US, down here, each task force is represented by a carrier and number of cruisers and destroyers. And it has this color code here. So the color code in this particular case for Enterprise is blue. You're going to come over here to the carrier card, and you're going to see a blue carrier labeled Enterprise, and all the chips underneath the aircraft for that carrier are blue. And so on and so forth for the Hornet being the black and the Yorktown being green. And then each of the bombers is going to have an ordnance type underneath it, whether it's torpedoes for the torpedo bombers and bombs for the dive bombers. Of course, the Japanese attack bombers have their choice. That's covered in the rules. And patrol aircraft are going to be noted by the fact that they're on a base. To go over the carrier card setup and basic usage, I'm going to use the Japanese card in this particular case. So again, each carrier is color coded. So you see the Akagi here in orange with aircraft and orange chips underneath it, and so on and so forth with the red Kaga, red chips, brown Hiryu, brown chips, and yellow Soryu, yellow chips, and purple Soiho and purple chips. And that just keeps the aircraft straight as to which carrier they came from. You also notice that each carrier has an upper deck and a lower deck, and that simply indicates that aircraft are either in the hangar being refueled, rearmed, or they're up on deck ready to take off. There's also an op status box for each carrier, which is covered in the rules, but essentially that lets you know if the carrier is either underway, under launch operations, or if they're recovering aircraft. So with game setup, you'll want to put everything in the hangars. And for the Japanese aircraft that are already in flight, they're over here on the map with their fuel status tokens as mentioned in the setup charts. Another aspect of the game is board upkeep and maintenance. One thing you can do is combine air groups, which is covered in the rules. In this particular case, we're looking at the Japanese fighters and bombers that are inbound to Midway in C-Zone 21. And just note that what I've done here is we actually have, for example, here we have some Kates that are from both the Soryu and Hiryu. So I've been able to stack the yellow chips and brown chips together and just put one model on the top because they all represent Kates that are in the same status of carrying bombs and have 1 fuel left. Right, another aspect of setup in this game is each one of the task forces as laid out on the setup cards. So whether it be the actual task force 16 or 17 on the American side, Or if you look at the Japanese card, they've got carrier divisions set out, or different support groups or attack divisions. Each one of those is going to be laid out on one of these bases so that you can easily keep the group together, keep it identified as to their status, and can easily move it as one large group. So because the setup of Midway is so different from other games you may be used to, I wanted to just go over a lot of the specifics of how to get it set up properly the first time, and then I think it'll be pretty easy to understand from there. So I'm going to go through the US setup just real quick. So you can see in the first column there, we've got a number of units that belong on Midway Island. Even though Midway is here on the map, the only units that actually set up on the map in this case are the fighters that are airborne with fuel remaining. And you can see that here on the setup chart. Over here on the fighter column, they're actually, instead of being listed at Midway, is C-Zone 31. And we see here C-Zone 31. And you're going to have this nomenclature of 2 with 2F. So that's 2 fighters with 2 fuel remaining. And so that's what we have here, a fighter with 2 chips underneath it and 2 fuel remaining. The rest of all of those units on Midway Island can be found over on the carrier card underneath. There's Midway Island. It's divided into 2 sections, actually 3 if you include the anti-aircraft guns there. But you've got the patrol aircraft in one section with the seaplane base, which corresponds to the marker on the map. And the map also has an indicator there underneath it for both that and the airfield. Just so you know where to place them. You can place those markers either on the map or on the card, whichever's more convenient for you on how to track the damage, but those bases can take damage, and so that's why the markers are there. So then on the other side of Midway Island here, we have the land-based aircraft, and that's what those units are that are being set up over on the chart. And then going across, we've got a number of C-zones, mostly for the patrol aircraft. So as the patrol aircraft set up, they're just out there by themselves. They don't need any fuel markers or chips. They'll operate individually. And then you'll also notice an indication, for example, on the heavy bomber, it says 2B. So that's a quantity of 2 bombers, and they are carrying bombs. And so as that's indicated, there's our B-17 heavy bombers in C-Zone 26, and they have their bombs underneath. So that pretty much covers the US setup. You're going to have a patrol aircraft there in 36, and one up there in 4, and one over here in 11 already working on finding the Hiryu and Soryu. So that's going to conclude the setup there. As far as the carrier task forces, they all start off the map. So they're going to be up here in the reserve holding area, as indicated in each task force by their group. And the American player chooses somewhat how those come onto the game board. Okay, next we're going to go over Japanese setup chart. We have Carrier Division 1 there with the Akagi and Kaga. Again, you're going to see a number of units, and then it'll have a number with an F for the fuel markers. There's an additional one on theirs. You'll note that there's a heavy cruiser with an R next to it. That means recon type. And those are the ones that control the recon aircraft for their side. And in the associated C-Zone, you'll also notice that it'll have a PTL for patrol. So those heavy cruisers will control the patrol aircraft, meaning that when it's time for these patrol aircraft to return to base, because the Japanese don't have a base, they actually return to the associated cruisers that go with them. All right, so Carrier Division 1 is going to set up in C-Zone 12 with the ships, and then C-Zone 21 is the bulk of the air fleet that has flown out halfway to Midway. Same there with Carrier Division 2. That's the other half of the air group that's in C-Zone 21. and then they are in Sea Zone 11, right next to the others. And you'll notice a very similar set of information there. Some of them have stars, as noted down here in the legend. That means that those are the units that are located on the carrier, or in the case of the Americans, the base. And so just be sure that those are the ones that go on the card. And so, for example, there you'll see a fighter, 1 star, meaning 1 fighter on the carrier, and then 1 in Sea Zone 11. He's on cap, and he's got 1 fuel left. So that is the unit here. And again, going down the carrier card, you'll see that they're all still in the hangars. They'll go through a launch readiness step during the turn sequence. Set your victory markers on each side to 0, of course, and as previously mentioned, these are the other groups up here. I don't have all my markers out for the task forces. I apologize about that. But these are the units up here in each, set up in each one of their task forces, and that is according to the card down here. The only sort of odd one is going to be these transport units, 1st and 2nd transports. Those are actually indicated simply by a pair of markers. And when the marker goes on the map, you'll put a number of chips underneath it that are equal to the ships in the group, which is 8. And as they take hits, if they take hits, then you reduce the chips like you normally would for the other units in the game. Hopefully that clears up a lot of the setup questions you might have. Let me know if any additional questions arise. Okay, last item of setup I really wanted to cover was how to set up the battle board. It is in 2 pieces in case you need to move it around or set up only part of it. You'll notice one has the US star, the other has the Japanese rising sun. That just lets you know which fleet is which. I typically leave them set up in this arrangement. Essentially what that represents is you've got your main carrier or battleship in the center, and the defense rings coming out from there, with aircraft operating in the blue areas initially and moving in towards the capital ships depending on which fleet is under attack.